Good morning and welcome back to a new series of Jump recruitment discussions. I hope you've all summered well. I hope you've had a good holiday. I know there's quite a lot of people still on holiday as it's the cheap time as kids are no longer at school or kids are back at school, so holidays are cheap. So if you're on holiday, enjoy. If not, enjoy our session. As we head into silly season, the busiest time of the year for recruitment, should we be looking at how leaders inspire performance in hard times? Is it all about process? Is it about passion, or is it about both? And as usual, we've got some stats that I want to sort of run out, and then obviously we'll get straight into the debate. 89% of recruitment prospects have already know if they want to work with the agency before they've even taken a call from that recruitment agency. And that's all about your processes, and that's all about your branding and how you get out of there. 17% of employers believe that their company will be able to anticipate their skills that an organization will need in the next 3 years. And yet we are insistent on looking at skills only for today. 63% of recruiters say talent shortage is their biggest problem, and 76% of hiring managers admit that attracting the right job candidates is their greatest challenge. 75% people would not take a job with a company if it had a bad reputation, although recruitment agencies still tend to work with an awful lot of those companies. On average, talent acquisition professionals spend a third of their week, that's 13 hours, sourcing candidates for a single job. And nearly 60% of job seekers quit online job applications midway through the process because it's too long, too complex, too complicated. 70% of responding candidates agree sourcing automation would increase productivity, and 62% of talent teams find more high quality candidates through sourcing their own data rather than inbound applications. A new thing that's sort of come out, which is quite interesting, 90% of hires are more productive if a gamification product is set in place in the recruitment business. And 68% of recruiters said that investing in new technology is the best way to improve the hiring process. It takes a company 42 days to fill a position, according to LinkedIn. But on average, according to the ONS, a candidate is on the market for less than 25 days. And a study has found that 73% of job seekers between the age of 18 and 34 found their last job through social media. And the big question on that is by 2025, 75% of the global workforce will be millennials. So do we think as a recruitment leaders, we need to inspire by what we do or by the processes that we put in place? I've got Dave and Heather with us today. Paul is down in Bristol. So welcome back, you two. Glad that you can join us today. And let's sort of kick off. Now, I know, Heather, you love the first question.
Don't be giving me this one the first time. Howard, definitely don't be giving me this one.
So, Dave.
I'll take the first one then.
Dave, over to you. In challenging times then, finding the right balance between process and passion is obviously a very delicate task. So from your vast experience, can you share examples from your background where you've effectively blended both the approaches of passion and process, which have led to sort of remarkable outcomes within your recruitment teams?
Yes, I think remarkable outcomes is a big stretch when you're trying to put all these things together. I mean, I think for me, Howard, in what we do in recruitment, we are constantly having to explain to our clients and our prospects about actually what we do. Because there are so many ways that clients can procure candidates directly. There's job boards, there's so many different things, so many uses of technology they can do. And for me, the approach is process with passion, not process and passion. It's about explaining in an articulate and passionate way, look, this is how we're going to find you that needle in the haystack. This is how we're going to find you 3 of these. And to use your example, Howard, some of that is using stats, like you have done at the beginning of this webinar, where you actually say, look, the client you've given us a requirement, this is how many people are in the market at the moment. This is the network that we have. These are the people we're going to speak to. And if you do that in an articulate and in a genuine way, I think you're more likely to have success. I can think of a campaign that we ran back in the day for HBOS, as it was, that we took them through every single detail of what we did. And even then, this is a number of years ago, the client was amazed, even though they had then a talent acquisition team, they were amazed at how many people were involved from the recruitment side in just securing a team of people for them to start up in Halifax. And having taken them through it and showed it along the way, we were able to say that we were able to secure the team of people, and it got nominated for an award, and HBOS, and we won that award. So it's that thing about make sure you've got the processes right, make sure you've got the passion right, and put them together rather than an and an or.
Heather?
I think it's really interesting because as you were explaining that, Howard, I was starting to think about how we bring people into the business and how we get the balance right. Because I think when we're training new people in the business, we teach them the how, but we don't always talk to them about the why. And so we get the process right. They need loads of process at the beginning, right? Because they're learning how to do the job. But do we spend enough time interweaving into that some focus on why and to keep and engender that passion? Because what we're doing really is talking to them about, you're going to bill this much, you're going to make this much money. But do we think enough about the passion with our trainees and the why they're doing it? And I think that's going to become increasingly important. That stat about millennials, Howard, there is a real passion in younger people coming through to know why they're doing things and to have a purpose. And so the passion is going to become really, really important. And I do think we need to think about that in what we're doing with bringing people into this industry. That's not quite the answer to your question, but
I think it's very relevant, because I had a conversation with one of my clients last night, a lengthy conversation about helping them with their onboarding process, and he's done quite a lot of exit interviews with consultants and found out why they exit, and a lot of them was not about KPIs. It was that they just didn't have the passion for recruitment, and they didn't understand what the recruitment market was like. So together, what we're going to start to build is probably a half-day session when they come in to talk about the recruitment market and what it actually does, to try build that passion to sell. And I think what you're talking about and what Dave's talking about is, and I'll give you an example of it from my own background from this, is that once people understand what they're doing and the benefits that is gained for them rather than the benefits for the company, then they start to actually favor either the process, and they have the passion behind the process. I remember sort of in my own business that, introducing a CRM, and the team that were there were particularly not wanting to implement a CRM, didn't want to do it, etc., etc. So I explained what we were trying to do and what we would do, and explained the way that we would use the data and what we would do with the data. This wasn't about driving a KPI big stick. And we had one consultant who was particularly, I'm not doing this, but he was a consultant that every month would come and say, right, I'm going to bill £100,000. This is my pipeline. And I'd say, right, okay, let's look at your pipeline. I'd go through his pipeline and say, right, okay, you're actually going to bill £9,000. That's what you're going to bill this month. And, he couldn't quite understand why it was. And then 3 months later, what we'd done is we removed all the paper from the office. We removed all the pens from the office, so people had to use the CRM. And then we were giving stats on, it takes this client 18 weeks to make a placement. It takes this client 55 CVs to make a placement. And we could give the stats for each individual client, but we could give the stats for each individual consultant, so they could focus on where they would make money. And as soon as they realized that, our productivity went through the roof, because they stopped working with clients that weren't doing the right things for them. They stopped working with clients that were shouting the loudest and started to work with clients that would actually make them money. And it gained a massive respect. It also armed them with data that they could then go back to those clients that were slow, had problems with their recruitment process, so they could actually then prove to their client why they need to change their process, and it starts to really evolve the business quite heavily. And so I think it is about having the right processes, but then creating the right passion behind those processes. And without the why, then consultants tend not to see that. And it's not the why for the business, it's the why for the consultants, which I think is the big differentiator there from that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. It's got to
So
be
as we move this
personal.
on, so as we move this on, how do you see the role then of a well-defined process in maintaining consistency and stability to grow and scale a business, particularly when you're facing a market like we are today? There's always that comment, is that if it's not broken, why change it?
Well, the thing about having a well-defined process, it gives you the ability to change things as the market changes, or you may have 10 staff and suddenly you're down to 5, or you may have 50 customers and suddenly you've got 70 customers. Lots of things can change quite quickly. But if you've got a well-defined process and you're well led, and as a leader you're leading your team well, you can tweak things as appropriate. Having a process doesn't mean you rigidly stick to every single thing, irrespective of what's going on in the market. It means you've got a map. And we've used this analogy before, but if I'm traveling from here to Leeds, Howard, and I'm going by train and suddenly there's a train strike, I've got to find another way. I've still got to get there. I've just got to know what I need to do depending on how the market changes. And as we know, the market doesn't change so dramatically overnight. It's just little things happen that week or that day, and you have to change that process. But you've got to have a process. You've got to have a way of doing things. You've got to have a way of articulating things. You've got to have a purpose. All of those things matter because it gives comfort to the people at the desk who are actually trying to find the people to be placed. And that process applies to people who are selling at the front end, and also those who are servicing the business, who are supporting the consultants, who are getting in the cash, who are hiring people, who are doing the marketing. As long as there are processes, as long as there is a way of doing things that is consistent, then you can change and adapt as you need to.
And it's really interesting, actually, Dave, because I was going to specifically focus on the back office for this, because that part of the question, Howard, where you're talking about that ability to grow and scale a business, I've seen so many examples in businesses that as they grow, they have a small back office of people who've been with the organization for a really long time, who really understand the business inside out and who keep it functioning. But the problem is the knowledge sits with those in small number of individuals who understand how the compliance works and how to get somebody on the payroll and all that kind of detail. But they are the only people who know it, and there's no process built. And sometimes the way in which they do it isn't the most efficient and the most effective, but it's the way they've always done it because they grew up with the business, and so they defined it all. And then what you find is that as the business tries to grow, instead of that person or that team becoming an enabler of growth, they become a blocker of growth. Because it depends on highly skilled individuals who have one way of doing things and who are constantly putting sticking plasters to fix new problems that come from growth and different markets and whatever it is. And actually, you almost, and it's almost impossible to do, is you have to start again and say, right, my business is different now. I need some new processes. I need some efficient processes that are able to be done by lots of people. And I know in the past we had to get into very big exercises of outsourcing in order to fix those sorts of things, because you've got ingrained, entrenched behaviours in your support team that are actually inhibiting growth. And that you've got to do something quite drastic about it. And I think that's a really common situation with recruitment businesses that are growing and have become dependent on, that office manager who's brilliant and knows how to do everything, but actually they inhibit growth because they don't have scalable, repeatable, templated processes.
So I'm going to put this at the leader's feet, but I'm also going to put it at the employee's feet as well. And I think it's the leader's job to inspire innovation and allow people to innovate within their business. And that leads back to that typical human element that's ingrained with all of us, which is fight or flight. And one of the things about fight or flight is that, once the pressure comes, if you haven't got the autonomy to say things, to improve things, or to change things, then you feel that you haven't got a say, and therefore flight and fight kicks in even harder and further. And so I think it's the leader's point that they've got to create an innovative environment where people can understand that things are going to change, and that it doesn't become a consistent process. It becomes a consistent process that is evolving all the time. And that means giving people the autonomy to actually innovate within the business and challenging the processes. The other side of that is that because we get so blinkered in the processes that we do, we sometimes never stop, take the blinkers off and look at things that we could improve.
Yeah, and
Because
Howard, the key word in what you've just said is challenge.
yeah.
So yeah, absolutely, you have to create the environment where people are confident to innovate and all that kind of thing. But we also have to not be, it's too easy to become complacent and dependent on a team of people who just do things and fix it. But actually, our job as a leader is to challenge that constantly. Is there a better way of doing it? Is it meeting our goals? Have our goals changed? And have we shared them? And to challenge for me is a really big part of what you're talking about.
And that's where I was getting to, is that that complacency then creeps in, that because we've done it like this forever, then that's fine. But that's complacency because we haven't moved forward. And we've been complacent because you're not challenged to innovate. The leader's not inspiring the people to innovate, and they don't feel then therefore they have to innovate to actually move forward.
Yeah, because it's risky, right? It's riskier. Why would I change anything? It was working for me. Is it working for you though? Could it be better? It's that. Yeah.
And that's it. That's it in a nutshell. I've got one client that's talking to, part of their business doesn't want to move to a CRM, doesn't want to, actually they're not using the CRM that they've got and don't want to move to a newer CRM, which is quicker, faster and better. But all the stats are saying that the recruitment process will be 75% quicker by using this than using the manual process that they've got now. And so that, again, it's about the habit and creating that habit in the team that as a leader, you should be challenging them to innovate, but as the team as well, they should be innovating themselves and challenge the leader to innovate. And I think that's a real different sort of view. And I think that's what sort of leads on to the next question about passionate employees. They tend to be more engaged and motivated. So if we looked at our sort of background, could we provide insight into strategies that recruitment leaders can use to cultivate and sustain passion among their teams, especially during tough periods?
I mean, I think passion comes from happiness. It's funny in recruitment, we don't talk a lot about being happy at work, but it doesn't matter whether it's recruitment or any other industry. Happy employees feel more engaged, and if they understand what the purpose of the business is and where they fit into that purpose, then they will tend to be more passionate. That sounds kind of obvious, but it's so obvious that often it doesn't actually happen. And you talk to people in businesses and they don't really understand quite what their role is, or they've lost the sense of, actually, this is what this business is about and what we're trying to do, whether it's a 5-person business or a 5,000 employee business. So for me, the passion bit comes from, are you happy in your job? Do you know what you're supposed to be doing? Are there processes? Are there relationships to help you get better at your job? Can you see a future in what you're doing? And does it fit into the purpose? Does your leader know what makes you tick?
And there's some really interesting data about that, about psychological safety, that organizations that have vocal and visible diversity, equity and inclusion policies, and that create a culture of belonging, are statistically more innovative and therefore more profitable, more sustainable than organizations that don't. And it is about that sense of psychological safety and belonging enables people to challenge, to innovate, and to be happy in their workplace. So there's some really interesting Harvard stats around that.
It was interesting.
And that's lovely, actually, how the culture of belonging is a lovely phrase,
isn't it?
As all the leaders that listen to this and that we deal with, if we could articulate that
Yeah.
at the desk for every single person, then you're going to have
because
a
that's
better
what DE&I is, right? People get put off DE&I, but it's absolutely about creating a culture of belonging for everyone.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I was on a an event meeting yesterday for the Teams network, and it was for their solopreneurs, their single people businesses from there. And we were talking a little bit about this and about that sort of culture and about what drives that. And what they were talking about is, when we're sort of working with clients, we've got to find the client's issue, find the problem so we can cure the problem. And I said, doesn't that set a very, very negative mindset within your client? And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, if you could get your client and help your client to be successful, does that not have a more positive mindset within your client? And therefore, you are going to be more successful because they can see you're the catalyst to their success.
Yeah.
And as you sort of grow a business, it's the same thing. If you're forever looking for the problems with your consultants or the problems with your processes, etc., then you're creating an environment where people are just looking for problems and looking for blame rather than how do we become more successful. And so I think sometimes it's the framing of what we're saying to people rather than actually what we're trying to do, that where we look for issues to create a better process, where we should be looking for the same thing, but how do we make that process more successful? How do we make that process a better place to be? And if they feel more engaged by being able to create something that's going to bring them more success, then that's exactly what you're talking about, Heather. It's a culture then of people being sort of forward thinking and looking at how they can engage. And I think they're the sort of things that we look at from a leader's point of view. So if you're forever looking at, whether you're looking at sort of weekly reviews, monthly reviews, quarterly reviews, and you're looking, why haven't you hit this? Why haven't you hit that? Then it gives a very negative mindset to everybody, and that includes the management, rather than how do we improve this? How do we make that better? How do we make you successful? You still end up with the same problems, but it's a different viewpoint of looking at it in a more positive way. And I think some of that, I remember sort of going through that with quite a number of offices that I inherited that were really performing poorly, where all they'd ever been done was hit with a big stick for poor performance. And I just sat there and said, right, how do we change this? How do we become successful? What do we need to do? And it took them a while to give me answers. But once they started to realize that they weren't going to get beaten up for those answers, they started to give me loads and loads and loads of answers. I remember I read the book on the Ford Motor Company, which nearly went bankrupt in the sort of early parts of 2000s. And the new MD came in, or the new CEO came in, and then he said that I remember this lady coming in with this massive, great trolley. He said, "What's that?" He said, "Oh, this is our strategy." He said, "Well, our strategy is not working. We're about several £billion in debt. Let's remove the strategy. I want you to bring every country manager and area manager in the world. I want you to fly them to the head office once a week from the world." And that's what he started to do. And he stood up in the first meeting and said, "Okay, everyone here is telling me that there is no problems in their business, and yet we're this in debt. So if you can tell me where the problems are, I'll happily fly to your place and meet them." Nobody out of a room of about 300 people stood up. So he flew them all next week in again. And so people were getting really angry. And he said, "Okay, unless you start telling me where the problems are, because we've all got problems." So again, no one stood up. So he took someone to one side. He said, "Why is no one saying this?" He said, "Because last time we said something about innovation, we knew that once we started to push down that process, we'd end up getting sacked." So he said, "Will you stand up next week? Because I'm going to fly everybody in next week." So he flew them in next week. And this guy stood up and said, "Yeah, I've got problems." And he said, "Right, I'll fly to your business and I'll come and help you with your problems." The following session, half the room stood up and said, "We've got problems." So it's understanding how you're made to feel in that problem process. And I think that leads to when you sort of look at, if you could share specific methods and practices. Okay, so if we look at about us sharing specific methods and practices that have proven effective in aligning individual passion with the company values and the goals, how does that work then to create a high-performing sales team?
I mean, I think to that, Howard, it's about ensuring that as a leader, you know what the individual passions are for all of your people. Because most of the people that work in recruitment don't have an individual passion for recruitment. It's a job that hopefully they enjoy, but I doubt whether they go home, they're going, this is the most amazing thing that's happened to me. You know, it would be lovely to think that they do, but most people in most jobs don't do that. It doesn't matter whether you're a nurse or a teacher or a banker or a forklift truck driver or whatever. Most individual passions are something else. And it's understanding what that something else is and how being at work and doing recruitment and doing the job that we do of placing people into jobs triggers or is aligned to what that passion is. And if we understand that and we understand what makes people motivated, I had a chap that was quite sullen at work on the floor, did his job, was an okay performer, 95%, 105%, whatever. Out of work, he ran a scout troop. He organized an international event. I mean, he was just fabulous, but I didn't know that. When I found that out, it was just tapping into the skills that made him so good out of work and putting that to use in work. And he ended up becoming the team leader for the resources in one office. And as he grew with his skills and he grew in his confidence, he actually ran the whole company's resourcing team, which was like water off a duck's back to him. But the job that he was doing
wasn't aligned with his passion.
It wasn't satisfying him at all, wasn't tapping into those skills. And it was a fortuitous conversation I had with him in the kitchen, rather than anything brilliant that I had done or that he had done, that enabled us to find out, actually, this guy out of work is really good. So my question to us as leaders is, do we know what makes our people tick? And whatever that little DNA is, whatever that secret sauce is, can we apply that in work?
Yeah.
So that goes back to that question about... Go on, Heather, sorry.
Well, no, I was going to say I'd like to spread that out at an organisational level, because I think that's a brilliant example of individual passion and individual values and harnessing it. But, you know, I know there's some L&D people on the call today. It's, you know, how do you make sure that all the interventions that we do in our organisation are promoting that kind of behaviour? And so for me, it's making sure that your values and your goals aren't just stuff that sticks in a strategy document in the wall, in a drawer, or they're not just things that are written on the wall in your office, so that your reference to them is constant and repeated. So when you design an L&D intervention for your business, you link it to the business goals and the values, so that you're promoting the why for absolutely everything that you do. So, you know, going back to your examples about Howard, about the new technology and using databases and creating data. So the implementation of that would be linked to, these are the values of the business, this is why we're doing it, this is the business goal that this is going to move us to, and this is how this impacts you individually, so that you just think about your values and your goals in everything that you do, that they live in your organization daily, rather than being something that you create and refresh once a year and then you don't really live it. So you have to live your company values and your business goals all the time as a leader. You've got to be talking about it all the time. It's got to relate to everything you do.
So that then says to me, one thing is what all managers are particularly poor at is when you find people who have the right skills, it's delegating tasks to them that ignite those skills and ignite their passion. And that makes them feel part of the process, part of the business, part of the success, rather than what lots of managers do is either delegate nothing or just delegate all the horrible things out to people and they don't like those things, etc. So I think it's
and they delegate poorly, Howard, right? They delegate out by just saying do this without giving them the context of this is why this needs doing, and also this is why I've chosen you to do it. So, you know, there's so much to good delegation that you can ruin the opportunity by doing it poorly.
So if we look at then sort of navigating through uncertainty often requires quick adaptation, how can recruiters, leaders foster an environment that encourages innovation and risk taking while still adhering to the essential recruitment processes?
I think this comes back to two things. One that we've already talked about, which is that creating that culture of belonging, right? That safety, that way in which you handle people taking risks and sometimes making mistakes, really is really helpful with this. So that context of, do you tell people off in a parental way when they make a mistake, or do you actually engage with them to help them learn from it? And so every error becomes an opportunity, so that you create a place where people feel safe to take risks. But it is also what we just talked about. It's about knowing why we do stuff. So if you understand why we have a process that works in the way it is, you know where it's safe to take risks with your process and where it's not. So if you understand your compliance process is this way because this is the fine you're going to get if you get it wrong, as opposed to this is the process that we do just because it helps. You know, it's the context and the deep understanding of what you're doing and why, and what happens if you get it wrong, that creates a culture that says people are willing to take risks.
And I think it goes back as well, doesn't it, Heather, to the values of the company?
Yeah.
Are your values all encompassing? If you have 4 or 5 values, which many companies will have, which of those are attuned to risk taking and innovation, and why don't we do things a bit differently? If within the organization there is fostered a belief that actually we can do things differently if we want to. We know what our purpose is. We know what we've got to do, but here's a new way. The market changed, things have shifted. We've got to concentrate more on contract and less on perm, or whatever it is. There'll be a myriad of different things. If people feel free to chip in with ideas and thoughts and new procedures and new ways of working, then the business is going to flourish. And it's giving the individual the opportunity to flourish, the team the opportunity to flourish, then the office, and then the whole company.
So I think there's an education piece there that sort of is shouting out to everybody. And I think it is, if you look at sort of the evolvement of a brand new rookie recruitment consultant right through to a director of a business from there, the recruitment consultant is eyes down, looking at today, looking at the recruitment problems that they have today, looking at what they need to solve today, looking at the jobs they need to fill, etc., etc. You then go to the opposite end. The director should be eyes up, looking at what's in the future, looking at what's coming down the channel, looking at what things that they can innovate and change. And I think so many leaders, especially in that you know the mid marketplace and the small marketplace, are still eyes down, looking at today's recruitment rather than actually looking what's coming down the line, and therefore they miss that opportunity. And I think if it's about then coaching people and training people that, you know, eyes down is great, but you've got to look up to see what's coming down the line so you can adapt and change and be innovative down the line, rather than having your eyes down and then something bangs you on top of the head and then you've got to change and then it's too late. And I think it is that sort of culture of getting management to be looking further down the line, be innovative with their staff so they can start to see that. And then you can start to foster relationships with the staff about, right, we need to change, but we can then change early rather than changing when it's absolutely necessity to change, okay, which then puts fear into people and stops change happening. So I think to me there's a big sort of process then for, you know, training as people go through that recruitment process, that, you know, as they get better at recruitment, their eyes should be coming up more, looking to the future rather than just staring down at their feet, looking at what have they got to do today. And I think that sort of leads on to sort of one of the questions is, it's a common challenge for leaders to address the team's needs, especially when it comes to technology. And everyone's talking about technology at the moment. So some recruiters embrace it, some recruiters simply ignore it, but what strategies can you help recruitment leaders with to effectively, should I say, implement new or better tech that actually makes the recruiter's life easier and faster and quicker?
You know, it's interesting. This is a great question, Howard. And just to sort of signal to those people who are listening, we have got a webinar coming up in the next few weeks, haven't we, where we're going to focus on tech and IT and some of the new services that we're adding to the Jump portfolio around this area. So kind of keep an eye out for that. Sorry to use this as a small sales pitch, but I do think this is so important because recruiters love new shiny tech, right? We do. We see it all the time, don't you? Love new shiny tech, but we're not always brilliant at implementing it. And it goes back to the things that we've talked about in some of the other questions. For me, it is about making sure people understand why. Why are you doing it? Why should they bother to engage with learning a new way? What's in it for them? And how it sits with the achievement of the organisation's goals. And sometimes it can be difficult to get values in there when it's a tech project, but I'm sure it's possible to do. And also, before I hand over to you two on this one, because you two have got lots of experience of practically doing this, it's also procuring your tech properly. Like, tech companies are really, really good at selling you great tech, and not necessarily at helping you implement it or helping you with the follow-on implementation that you need after it's gone live. Like, once the invoice is paid and the deal's done, you know, you don't always get the same amount of support that you did in the run up to it. So I think making sure that you buy it well and that you buy the support that you're going to need to implement it properly. That's slightly off topic for today, but I just think it's a really important learn for me, being involved in tech projects in the past. I wished I'd bought it better.
Yeah, I think, Heather, the point you just made there was the point I was going to make, because I think it absolutely is vital. I think as a measurement, recruitment leaders should spend twice as long with their new provider talking about implementation support than they do talking about trying to get the price down from £84 per person per desk to £83.50.
Yeah.
Because most recruitment leaders spend a lot of time on the implementation, looking at the price rather than the support. And to Howard's question, the more you can engage the staff in the first 6 months of what this new piece of tech is and what it's going to do for you, and the more you can engage them even before you bought it, the better. Because most recruiters, and I say this with respect to everybody on the call, most recruiters will look for a way around whatever they can do to get to the right candidate, to use LinkedIn rather than a database, to go onto a job board. We've all been there hundreds of times. So therefore, as leaders, it's our job to make sure they are engaged. And often we need the support of the tech provider, which, and again, I say this respectfully because we have a number of tech companies that we work with, most tech companies are less good at the implementation. They just want to sell it.
Yeah.
Once they've sold it, they've made the deal. They don't want to then have to keep coming back and saying, well, I don't know how you attach a CV to this and how the invoice goes. And go back to the process question, Howard. There's a whole process for doing that. They just want to sell it. And that's the most common complaint that we get from people who are implementing tech. They've bought it, they don't know how to use it.
If you think about what, and I'll look at the good recruiters and I'll look at what they like. They like talking to their candidates. They like talking to their clients. They like that engagement. They like that social engagement. And as we said at the beginning, if 68% of recruiters said investing in new tech is a better way of improving, hiring performance, then what that says, it gives them an opportunity to speak to more candidates and speak to more clients. And if 70% of the recruitment respondents said agreeing sourcing automation would increase productivity, again, it's about getting people to do the right things. And I think what you're talking about there is absolutely right. When we know lots of recruitment tech providers who are great at selling the tech, but never ever are great at training. But also then that's down to the business about what they're doing about training and development of that tech and understanding that tech even after that training has been done. And I think that involvement of people all the way through helps with that. But I think the bigger thing that helps with that is having tech that is all out of one hub. So you have your hub and then the tech comes out of that. So nothing is in a different silo. Everything connects together. Because if you have to leave one thing to go into something else, you have to go into something else to do that. And it was interesting. People sort of said, when I've told people the story about, I took paper away from people, and they said, why, that's daft. I said, well, think about it. The reason why they're not putting anything on the CRM is because they're writing it on a piece of paper and then they haven't got time to put it on a CRM because it's a duplication of the process. I took the paper away, gave them headphones and said, just type, and not a problem. There was never an utter. There was never a, why can't we have paper back? They suddenly realized that actually that's a far quicker way of doing it just by removing some things, because you were just doubling up the process.
Mm.
And so it's just small innovative things that help that. But I think, Dave, you're absolutely right there with regarding that. It is about getting your tech provider to train people beyond. And I remember having this conversation with a friend of mine who's in the tech market, who's Scottish. And he said, to me, you are pith. And I said, what's that? He said, you're a pain in the Harris all the time. And I said, why? He said, because you call me up constantly about our tech and get us to improve that tech and get us to do different things. So you're learning all the time. And then I was imparting that learning to my team all the time. So I think as leaders, you should embrace your tech and you should know all about your tech. And then you can give the advantages to your team and allow them to innovate as well as they're seeing it from the day-to-day basis and working from there. I suppose that leads to sort of the final question of today, is about sort of collaboration. So if you look at, people talk about collaboration being sort of pivotal to recruitment success. So how can leaders balance the need for a structured process, such as, BD, lead generation, candidate attraction, with the autonomy and flexibility that consultants desire, especially now we've got lots of people working from home, which has created a very disjointed working pattern. So how do we sort of remove potential blockers to communication and collaboration, problem solving during this period of time when things are changing hugely about not just the process, but about the environment that process has originally been designed to take place in?
This one, I love this question, Howard, and so I'm going to slightly controversially challenge your question.
Good.
Really. So I don't think this is anything to do with working from home and creating disjointed working patterns. I think this is an age-old perennial human being problem. And I think working from home is just the latest iteration of it. Many, many, many years ago, I worked for a recruitment organization, and we took 100 people from that organization to Barcelona for a conference. And one of the things we were trying to address is exactly this. So, and this was way before working from home existed. How do we get people to collaborate? How do we balance those different things? How do we create autonomy and flexibility within structure? And one of the things we did was we did a game that they played around Barcelona, where we gave them clues and we gave them some money and tickets, and they had to follow these clues around Barcelona. And then we had learning stations in different places around Barcelona. And one of them, the one I was manning, was a Templar site. So it was an old Templar monument, beautiful cloister, dating back to, which is why I'm saying this is an age-old problem. Right, so the Templars didn't have mobile phones, they didn't have phones at all. They barely had a postal service. It was somebody who took letters, across Europe on horseback, but that took weeks and months to get there. And yet they were a massive, powerful, influential organization that managed to be hugely successful for a number of years before, obviously, they weren't anymore. But the way in which they did that was they had very, very clear mission, vision and value. And so no matter where the people who were part of the Templar organization were in the world, and whether they could communicate with their leaders or not, they understood what was the purpose of their role in that organization and the goal of the organization. And so they could make local decisions that were in keeping with the organization's goals, values and mission. And if people understand that, it doesn't matter where they are in the world and whether they're sitting at working at home in their kitchen or working in your office, if they know why they're doing it and they know the purpose of their role and they know the goal of the organization, they know to make decisions that will take the organization where it goes, because you give them the autonomy to be able to do it. So it was a really good, fun way to show people that. But it was a really powerful experience.
It's a really interesting way to talk about the Knights Templar, the creation of the first sort of cross-cultural banking organization, destroyed by the Catholic Church in the end, because the Catholic Church thought they were getting too more powerful. But that was it. It was all about the communication down the line. So I could be in Barcelona, as you said there, and say, look, I've got £100 to put here in Barcelona, and then get to London and say, I need my £100, and that conversation would be then sent across the line, yes, and eventually I'd get my £100 out of there. But that was the first international banking. But I think you're right, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to say exactly the same thing, but not use the Knights Templars, but use that working from home is not an excuse. It's all about your ability to communicate, to create collaborative teams across the piece, irrespective of where they are in the world. And I was going to use people like, Avon, who have been a working from home company for the last 100+ years, have a great culture and communicate extremely well across everybody. And they all know the mission, the vision, and the statement. Dave?
Yeah, and I think if we adopt the mindset that process brings freedom, rather than process gets in the way of us doing stuff, then I think you can have all the freedom, all the innovation, everything that you need, as long as you know how to do stuff, as long as you know there is a way of doing stuff, and you accept that, then you can be yourself. Recruitment is about people. Each person is going to be different. Each person brings a different dynamic and a different way of doing stuff. As long as you follow a process, or you know what that process is, there's an immense amount of freedom to be had in doing your job in recruitment. It's one of the reasons why it's such a great industry to work in.
But it's the ability to follow that process, isn't it? But then having the discipline to follow the process, but then the process allowing that individual, I suppose, charisma to come out within that process. And I always use this as the analogy is everyone learn to drive, but everyone drives in a slightly different manner, in a slightly different way, but within that discipline of this is you need to change gears in this fashion, etc. They all change it in a slightly different way. And I think that's what we're talking about, is that the process needs to be structured and it needs to be robust, but it needs to be allowed to have people's own entrepreneurial flair within that, but within a certain boundary. As you're driving a car, as soon as you go out of that entrepreneurial bound, you either stall the car or crash the car or whatever happens, because you've lost the discipline to actually keep that car's momentum moving forward. So a very interesting conversation today. Thank you very much, Heather. Thank you very much, Dave, for your input. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for attending. Much appreciated. As Heather said, on the 20th, we're going to bring in an ex-IT director who has joined our business to help companies with their IT strategies. And we're going to have a very, very long conversation about putting tech into a business from an IT point of view. So it will be not a supplier from an actual recruitment point of view, what we're going to do. So that'll be an interesting conversation on the 20th. Next week, however, what we're going to look at is we're going to look at are certain consultants undermining your process. Okay, and therefore are they holding your business back? And this isn't about having consultants that are terrorizing your business. This is just about having consultants that are just not quite doing the right things, but could be holding your business back. And how do we change that? So, ladies and gents, thanks for your time. It's been much appreciated. Dave and Heather, thanks for your time. I look forward to seeing you all next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Have a good week, everyone. Bye-bye.